Sarah Parker's hands trembled as she pulled the last crumpled $5 bill from her worn-out wallet. It wasn't much. In fact, it was all she had left after paying rent, utilities, and helping her neighbor with groceries the week before. Sarah, a young nurse, was used to putting others before herself. Long shifts at the hospital, endless overtime, and a heart that never seemed to say no, that was her life. But tonight was supposed to be different. For the first time in years, Sarah had agreed to a blind date. Her friend had practically begged her to go, promising, "This guy isn't like the others. Just give him a chance." Still, she had doubts. She didn't have money for fancy dinners or new clothes. All she had was a simple blue dress she'd worn a dozen times before, and the $5 she clutched tightly, just enough to buy herself a coffee at the little cafe downtown where they had planned to meet. Walking in, Sarah ordered the cheapest drink on the menu, a small cappuccino. As the barista handed it over, she felt embarrassed. She couldn't afford anything else, and part of her hoped her date wouldn't notice. Moments later, the cafe door swung open. In walked Daniel, tall, confident, and dressed in a sharp suit. Everything about him screamed success. Sarah's heart sank. What was I thinking? She thought. A man like him wouldn't want someone like me. But when Daniel's eyes found hers, his smile was warm, not judgmental. He walked over, introduced himself, and pulled out the chair across from her. At first, their conversation was awkward. Sarah tried to hide her nervousness, sipping slowly on her tiny cappuccino. But as minutes turned into hours, she found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. Daniel was kind, attentive, and surprisingly humble. Then came the twist neither of them expected. When Sarah excused herself to the restroom, the barista leaned over to Daniel and whispered, "You know, that woman used her last $5 on that coffee. She comes here sometimes after her hospital shifts. Always exhausted, but always smiling. She's one of the good ones." Daniel froze. He looked at Sarah differently when she returned. Not with pity, but with admiration. Because he knew exactly what it was like to come from nothing. What she didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just her blind date. He was the owner of that cafe chain, the CEO. A man who had built his empire from scratch, who never forgot the struggles of his past. The date ended with Sarah apologizing for being boring and saying she hoped she hadn't wasted his time. Daniel shook his head, eyes soft. "Sarah, tonight has been the best time I've had in years. And if you'll let me, I'd like to see you again." A few weeks later, Sarah walked into the cafe after another exhausting hospital shift. But this time, she didn't pay. Her coffee was already waiting for her at the counter, with a note, for the woman who gave her last $5 for a smile. Tears welled in her eyes. For once, someone had seen her, not just as a nurse, not just as someone struggling, but as a person who mattered. And as their story unfolded, Sarah realized that sometimes the smallest act, a simple cup of coffee bought with your last dollar, can change your life forever. Have you ever had one of those days where life feels heavier than usual? That was exactly the kind of day Sarah Parker was having. Sarah was a nurse, one of the most selfless, hard-working women you could meet. She spent her days caring for patients, staying overtime without complaint, and checking on elderly neighbors before heading home. She always gave and gave, but rarely received anything in return. And tonight, she had exactly $5 left to her name. A crumpled, faded bill in her wallet. She stood outside the cafe, heart pounding, whispering to herself. "It's just coffee. Just buy the coffee, Sarah. Don't overthink it." Inside, the warm smell of roasted beans and vanilla filled the air. People laughed at their tables, couples held hands, and college kids worked on laptops. Sarah stepped up to the counter, shyly ordered the smallest cappuccino, and handed over her last $5. As she waited, her stomach twisted. This wasn't just any coffee. This was the start of a blind date, her first in years. Her friend had set it up, swearing this guy was different. But Sarah? She wasn't so sure. She didn't feel like she belonged in the world of dating anymore. Not with her old blue dress, not with empty pockets, and not with the exhaustion of endless hospital shifts written across her face. Then the door opened. Daniel walked in. Tall. Confident. The kind of man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes polished, his presence commanding. Sarah nearly sank into her chair. Oh no, this has to be a mistake. Someone like him? With me? But Daniel spotted her immediately. And instead of hesitating, his face lit up with a warm smile. He walked right over.